say welcome to everybody and thank you to Miles Richardson very much so for coming along and giving this talk today on nature connectedness. Miles is a professor of human factors and nature connectedness at Derby University, and I'm actually delighted to hear what he's got to say to us today. So without more ado, Miles, if you're ready to go, I'll be delighted to hand over to you and maybe a little more introduction about yourself and your work. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks, Ian, and hello all. Just let me do my pressing of buttons. There we go. That should be visible to all, and I'll just make it go onto that bit. There we go. Come on. I'm trying to just a minute. There we are. Yes. So yeah, nature connectedness. I set up the nature connectedness research group in 2013 at the University of Derby, and it's all took off. And we've been ridiculously busy for about 10 years, it seems. And I'm going to cover what nature connectedness is, a bit about what we do, and also I'm going to spend a bit more time on where the types of work I'm getting involved in now, because my approach has changed as the years have progressed. So this is just a brief slide of what we do. I put this together because it was our 10th birthday a couple of years ago.
Miles, could I just people are asking if you can make the screens full screen.
That is full screen for me.
All right. We're all getting the presentation mode.
I think it needs to be on slideshow.
Yeah, you need to go to slideshow.
No, I was on slideshow as far as I was aware. And I will try reading view instead, because that's similar, but you just get the bars at the top.
That's better.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is what we've done over the past 12 years, really. On the left-hand side, you see a column which is understanding. So we do the research as you'd expect. I think the papers I've done, I've got 100 papers or so now. So we do the research side. But I started off in engineering, so I quite like solutions and application. So we do the next column as well, which is applying the results of the understanding and the knowledge that we get from the research, and we apply that in a number of areas. So that's where you can see the arrows going across. So nature connectedness is about our relationship with nature. So a big chunk of it is working on applying that and trying to create schemes, programs, policies that help improve people's relationship with nature. We apply that. We do a lot of sharing and dissemination through handbooks and the like. Our handbooks have had around 100,000 downloads, I think. We give free courses and things like that. And then, as I kind of intimated at the start, and then we moved to scaling up, which is probably the last few years of our work of how do you move from a program for a few people to kind of societal change. So that's the kind of understanding, applying, sharing, scaling up around our new relationship with nature. But we also have done mental health interventions for the RSPB. Their nature prescription uses one of the things I developed, Mind, and we worked with the Mental Health Foundation on the Mental Health Awareness Week in 2021, I think. We would also do a bit on metrics. So how do you measure nature connection, and how do you measure pro-nature conservation behaviours, and they're both now official statistics. They're asked monthly in the People of Nature survey, so that's useful data to have. We can now, there's 5 years of that now, so we can track what's been happening across the nation. And we get into pro-nature behaviours as well, as kind of not opposed, but to differentiate those from pro-environmental behaviours, which are broadly carbon cutting, pro-nature or biodiversity promoting behaviours. So two different things really. Yeah, and then I came up with the biodiversity stripes as well in, I don't know when I came up with them, but a few years ago, and they've been all over the world with the COPs and at various places. So that's the kind of thing we do overall. And then I'll just go into, it's about 3 parts, I think, the talk. I'll focus on the more recent stuff in the third part. This part is just the kind of initial introduction. If you want this in massive depth, you can buy the book. But the need for reconnection is the kind of first port of call. And I don't need to tell everyone watching today about these issues, but we've got climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, probably got a mental health crisis, which you can put down to our relationship with nature. And the 4 minutes 36 seconds is just one example from one study we did. That's the amount of time people in Sheffield spend in green spaces each day. So probably about, well, yeah, a lot less than it used to be. So our relationship with the natural world is failing. And, well, just a minute, lost my pointer. There we go. Yeah. And yeah, if you don't agree that our relationship with nature is failing, there's stats now that are emerging that put the UK in some global context, because I think many people might see us as a nation of nature lovers, with millions of us are members of conservation groups. But when you measure nature connection, which is our relationship with nature, it's just one way of measuring that, a particular psychological construct. When some data became available for Europe, we were bottom for nature connection, near the bottom for biodiversity, and near the bottom for well-being. And then recently, and hopefully I'll finally get this published. I've been trying for a year to get this published, just waiting for a journal's reviews rather than finding a home for it. Yeah, in a survey of 63 nations, the United Kingdom was 57th. So it gives some context that, yes, our relationship with nature might not be as close as we think. We're perhaps a nation of pet lovers as much as we are, well, probably more than we are nature lovers. So I'm interested in the long view. I'm not a historian, so I enjoyed writing this bit of the book and kind of looking back and asking the questions, well, what's happened since we were, our ancestors were hunter-gatherers, and we went through agricultural, scientific, industrial, and technological revolutions to end up in the box on the top, where we spend a lot of our time in boxes of one shape or size of another, increasingly with technology, and the outside world becomes, yeah, a lot drier in some places, I suppose, a lot wetter in some places, and nature suffers as a result. And we tend to focus on treating the symptoms of that broken relationship with technological solutions, because we're a technological ape, and we try to have greener consumption and reduce carbon emissions and things like that, things that we need to do, but they're ultimately treating the symptoms of something else. And we restore nature, or hope to restore nature and plan to restore nature. But up until perhaps a year ago, there was very little focus on restoring the relationship between people and nature, and that's probably still quite niche policy-wise, but it's now accepted a lot more widely that that's the causal problem, and it's accepted by bodies such as these. They've all got reports about our relationship with nature, and some of them talk about nature connectedness as well. So there's global recognition now. So even though the UK is whatever we were, 57th, was it, out of 63, the nations higher up the table are concerned about it as well. So just shows how far we've got to go. And I mentioned I formed the research group in 2013. I kind of got on at the start of a large wave, it now seems. And so you can see there the amount of research in nature connectedness went from one journal article that mentioned it in 2001 to a ridiculous amount now, which is too many to read. I think that's up to about 1,500 a year now. So that's you can see the massive rise in interest in the last 10 years. And that has culminated in a way in the IPBES assessment of transformative change. That's the full title, quite difficult to remember. The IPBES assessment of the underlying causes of biodiversity loss and the determinants of transformative change for achieving the 2050 vision for biodiversity. So IPBES, I'm sure many of you are aware, is the biodiversity version of the IPCC. Their wording seems to be more clumsy. And then they found out or concluded in their report that there was 3 underlying causes of biodiversity loss, and one was disconnection of people from nature, which is great to have that recognised. And human nature connectedness was recognised itself as a powerful strategy for transformative change. And I was one of the lead authors on that report, but I didn't have the power to bias the report. There was 170 nations involved, or 170 experts from perhaps 50 nations. So nature connectedness is seen as one of the 5 strategies for change in that report. And it's a very long report, but if you're not aware of it, I would encourage you to read the policy summary. And I've summarised it myself on my blog as well. So there, I won't go through all of those, but you can see that that they've mapped out some ways to have societal change in our relationship with nature, not just in the UK, across the world, in areas that are starting to have their own failing relationship. We were probably ahead of the game. But that's all very depressing and quite sad. So there are still signs of our latent connection with nature, and some of them are quite fascinating. So just a few little examples here that from the laboratory. If you show people a picture of roses for 3 minutes, you can detect that in their physiological response. And it's the same response that you get in forest bathing. So you can see the person there stood in the forest. The body knows when it's in a forest, and it calms our emotions and helps us manage our moods. You can get the same effect by looking at a single flower, indeed. And you can get the same effect in the laboratory if you blindfold someone and ask them to place the palm of their hand on various materials. It's when your hand is touching the unfinished wood that your body knows somehow that it's back in touch with nature and calms down. So these fascinating kind of links back to our prehistory. And you find, there's a little brain there, you find that the amygdala is better formed in people who grew up in areas with more woodland, and similarly for the microbiome is healthier in people who grow up closer to nature. And it's also worth remembering that our bodies are only 50% human cells, 50% is our microbiome. So we've got these very deep embedded relationships with the natural world. So I've kind of implemented what nature connectedness is, but just to formally cover that, it's different to contact and exposure to nature. It's an internationally recognized psychological construct. So it's a person's sense of their relationship with nature. It's both cognitive and emotional. So it's an emotional love of nature, if you like, but it's also a cognitive, oh, I am part of the natural world. Because it's a psychological construct, we've got psychometric scales so we can measure it. We've found that through doing experiments, that means we can change nature connection, we can improve it in people by getting them to do certain things. And when it's measurable, obviously that allows science and provides some evidence and clarity which some people need to be persuaded. Not everybody, but some people do. So it's useful to have that type of evidence as well. And there's evidence that it's a basic psychological need, and it also unites both human and nature's well-being. It's good for nature and it's good for the individual as well. So that's what nature connectedness is. And then this, what year was this? 2019. Yeah. So this was the first national index of nature connection that we developed with Natural England. So we started to get some measures across the lifespan as well. So we did this survey of the population in England, obviously not all of it, a small sample of it, and you get this teenage dip in nature connection, which I won't go into in detail, but I'm sure many of you might be able to recognise it and theorise why that might happen. And it also, I won't go into the detail of the question mark either, but it did occur to me, and this is not science at all. All I did was extrapolate that line, and it went back to 100, coincidentally perhaps, when we were born. And it just helps paint the picture of, well, perhaps a baby now is the same as a baby 20,000 years ago, very connected to nature, and then perhaps we become disconnected during our schooling and childhood and struggle to recover that. So just an interesting kind of thought that occurred to me. So that's our failing relationship with nature. Hopefully you kind of agree with that kind of concept, that we have this relationship with nature and we're trying to measure it. There, I'll just have a sip of my drink in just a moment. So I'll move on to the next third, which is just the benefits of reconnection, which, as you can see, again, I'm going into some detail in my book. So this is, as we said, more than exposure to nature, which has benefits, but connection too. So for people, nature connectedness has been found to have a number of mental well-being benefits, basically around feeling good and functioning well. So feeling good, vitality, happiness and the like, functioning well, having meaning and purpose in life, a worthwhile life, personal growth. And there's other benefits that have come in certain papers as well, pro-social behaviours and better body image as well. But mainly it's around mental well-being, feeling good, functioning well. And this these kind of circles being tossed around in the air, that's just one example from the work that we did with Natural England. This was how nature visits, socioeconomic status, which is an accepted benchmark, and nature connectedness explain whether people think they've got a worthwhile life. Nature visits wasn't significant in explaining that. Socioeconomic status was, but nature connectedness was 4 times, explained 4 times more. So you can see that this relationship with nature is actually quite important, and not just for our own well-being, for nature's well-being as well. So there's been enough research now for systematic reviews, and they found a strong and robust link between nature connection and pro-environmental behaviours. We didn't have the pro-nature conservation scale back then, and there's evidence that that's a causal link as well. And so that's quite different to the facts and figures approach, which is often used to try and change behaviour. I think generally among many behaviours, it's seen as knowledge explains 2 to 3% of behaviours. And there was one study in children's ecological behaviours that nature connectedness explains 69%. So you can see it's relationships that change behaviours, perhaps. And then we move on to creating a new relationship. Oh, I'm whizzing through these slides, so there'll be plenty of time for questions. So this, I suppose, is the bulk of what I do, because it's the applied bit. We need to understand, but we also need to improve our relationship with nature, and that's the root cause of many issues. So we'll just go into that. So I'm going through, well, probably about 10, well, maybe not 10, 8 years of researching about one slide here. So when I started out, I was kind of interested in individuals' relationships with nature and individual interventions. And I started off with 3 good things in nature, prompting people to notice nature every day. And when we prompted people to notice nature every day, just for a week, we found that mental health improved, and it was sustained for a month. And that was a study that we did with a few hundred people, an RCT in Sheffield. And when you got people to write the good things in nature down each day, it improved their mental health, particularly in people with mental health conditions, and it improved their nature connectedness as well, which was the whole point. And we've since found in other studies, we've confirmed that, but it increases pro-nature conservation behaviours as well. But the trouble is, that's a simple thing to notice nature. But in work we've done with the National Trust, 80% of people rarely or never watch wildlife, smell wildflowers. I think it was 68% of people said they'd never listened to birds singing. I just find unbelievable that there we are. There's lots of other things to pay attention to nowadays. So yeah, people don't notice nature. So you kind of got to make nature mainstream again, which is something that we think about quite a lot, actually, is how do you make nature, and just simply noticing nature, more mainstream again. And that was something that the lockdown in 2020 helped illustrate. So we just, by pure coincidence, we started measuring nature connection across England in March 2020. So we were able to look at the stats for each month and saw that the effect of the lockdown and the kind of pause in life for many people, that improved nature connection. But we'd also put a question in noticing nature, one space, and I said, oh, put one on noticing nature. And while the press reported quite a lot on visits to nature increasing 40%, because that's one of the things that you could do, noticing nature increased more, 74%. And it was the noticing nature, when you did the stats, that explained people's feeling of well-being during that time, rather than the visits to nature. So it's that, comes back around to that engagement with nature rather than just visiting nature is what really matters. One of the main things that we've done at Derby is the 5 pathways to nature connection. So this was a PhD that started in 2013 and finished in 2016, and it's been widely used and been very, very successful. We've lost count of the organisations that are using the pathways to nature connection, and they're very straightforward. They're based on Kellett's 9 values of biophilia and the types of relationship that people have with nature. There's, if you're familiar with those, you'll know there's 9 or so values of biophilia that Kellett mapped out, and we looked at which ones were associated with nature connection and improved nature connection. And the 5 that did, we renamed them because we wanted them to be accessible to people, were senses, sensory contact. Second was nature's beauty, appreciating nature's beauty. The third was engaging your emotions and being aware of your emotions and the positive emotions that nature brings. The fourth one is the biggie, I suppose. It's meaning, celebrating and sharing nature's events and stories. So there's lots and lots of ways that we can do that, and people do that. And then compassion was helping and care for nature. So they're the 5 types of activity, or the buttons that you need to try and press to help people improve their nature connection. So it doesn't need to be all 5 at once, and you design programs, spaces to press those buttons. And as I say, they've been widely used. But going back to the sense of relationships again, when you look at the pathways, I think, like elsewhere in life, a lasting and sustainable relationship comes through noticing emotion, finding beauty, meaning, and compassion. And as I say, they've been widely used. From the first use was in 30 Days Wild, the Wildlife Trust's campaign. We helped the National Trust do the redesign of 50 Things. That was based around the pathways. The government-funded programs, Generation Green and Green Influencers, were designed around the pathways, and buildings and places too have applied that design framework. And you can see there the Stockholm Plus 50 report, which was commissioned by the UN 2022, I think, that recommended that school curricula were informed by the pathways as well. So they've really taken hold and been a great success. And there is, just because I've got a picture and we're involved in the project, a picture of the biophilic school, the UK's first biophilic school that opened in Derby probably 2 or 3 years ago now, maybe years ago. It doesn't look like that quite yet. There's still more soil than there is plants, but the plants have been planted and they're growing away, and hopefully soon that the school will look a bit more like that. And we've been monitoring the children in that school now for 4 years. I think we monitored them in their previous school, and then when they moved to this school, and we're kind of doing a longitudinal study of how being in that school affects their well-being, relationship with nature, and pro-nature behaviours. So yeah, that's ongoing, but hopefully we'll be able to share some of that research in the next year or so. Quite a big project working with DFE. I've put this in because it kind of sums up what the first kind of 6 or 7 years of our work in a way. This was the results of our treescapes project. So we've done a couple of big research projects, the kind of big £1 million UKRI projects, and one was treescapes, which is why this figure says woodlands, but it could be, it can be just nature. And it summarised the findings of 3 years of research from our work package, basically. And as you see, it's another hopefully simple story to try and share our findings. You can see the people walking into the woodland, the tree, designing places and spaces and natural environments for inclusive access, offering opportunities around the pathways for engagement with nature, and for opportunity to care for nature, opportunity to connect with nature, and then sharing those success stories and celebrating those success stories with the local community, which hopefully inspires others to enter the tree and get the benefits of a connection with nature. So I quite like that tree. It was an idea I came up with in January. I need to share it a bit more often because it works quite nicely. And you've got the landscape of Derby in the background there, which works quite well. So that was the kind of first 7 years or so, perhaps. And then, as I say, I've moved on to thinking more or less about individual nature connection to societal change. And this is a diagram I did a few years ago. It's a bit complicated, and I've tried to make it nicer, but this is the best I've got so far. It tries to summarize things. So on the left, you've got our dominant relationships with the natural world, which have been needed for survival and the progress that we've all seen over many centuries. But those dominant relationships with the use of nature, the control of nature, and the consumption of nature and natural resources, which has led to a failing relationship, a kind of biased relationship, I suppose, and a warming climate and loss of biodiversity. And a new relationship with nature is those pathways types relationships. So going back to Kellett's biophilic values, they go that way towards a closer relationship with nature, which is linked to mental well-being, pro-nature behaviour, and pro-environmental behaviour. And I've kind of thought about that in terms of the concept of leverage points. I don't know if you're aware of Donella Meadows' concept of leverage points back from 1999. Well, they're still quite widely used. So when you've got a big heavy weight, like our dominant relationships with nature, you use a big long stick to try and move it. But the trouble is 99% of effort goes into the shallow end of the leverage. So we talk about parameters and standards and policies for green space. That's not going to change our relationship with nature, but that's where most of the effort goes. And through the concept of deep leverage points, you go up from parameters and standards through feedback dynamics and feedback loops, and sharing the data and creating stories and organizational stories and community stories, which brings you up to the design of social structures and information and incentives and organizations and the concept of nature connected communities. And at the very deepest leverage point is aims, mindsets, and values. So if you go to the DFE website and look at what are the aims of education in the UK, I don't think the last time I looked, there was no mention of the environment or sustainability. And they're relatively easy to change in terms of it's just someone writing some text and agreeing to it. But obviously, to change the aims of education in the UK would be a massive undertaking. But nobody campaigns for that. We'll campaign for access to green space and things like that, which are very much needed. But in terms of leverage points for societal change, they're very low level. If we campaigned for children's education to include a more sustainable future, that would flow down through the design of the curriculum and design of schools and design of organizations and feedback loops and league tables, and then to standards as well. So that's the concept of leverage points. So I've started thinking about societal change more. And that table of table of nature connection that I showed earlier, where the UK is 57th, I got my hands on that data last summer, and hopefully that paper will come out in maybe October, November time. And what we did is, because we've got data from 63 countries, we looked at the macro factors, the big national level indicators that explain the difference between Nepal and Canada, for example, those countries at the top of the table and the countries towards the bottom of the table. And what you found was that countries that focused more on economy and successful business had a lower relationship with nature. Places that focused more on providing biodiversity and access to biodiversity had a stronger relationship with nature. More spiritual countries had a stronger relationship with nature, and there was a link between science and technology attitudes and the relationship with nature. So these were the four big factors that came out of that analysis. So you've got the socio-technical systems in the outer world, and then your socio-political values in the inner world, as you might say. So you've got this blend of blue is the inner world here, and our values, etc. And then green is the world, the structures that we live in. And I just put them into this figure because that's the way I made sense of the findings. But it kind of hopefully helps explain things, and then you can start to look at interesting things like, you've got an axis which is spirituality and urban nature. How often do we talk about sacred green spaces in urban places? So you can start to think about that as a topic, and socioeconomics and science and tech attitudes, techno-social dynamics. We've had agricultural, industrial, scientific and technological revolutions, but has there been a revolution in spirituality? Is that kept pace? Perhaps not. So that idea of macro factors and the like, that got me thinking into my latest research. So this is what I've been doing in this past 9 months or so. And I started thinking about time as well, because nature connectedness is quite often talked of in similar terms of mindfulness and being in the moment. And so it's now. What about the past? What about the future? And I started thinking about time and the concept of being a good ancestor, and that long view of looking back to hunter-gatherer times and very different relationships with nature, where we're deeply embedded into the natural world. And obviously we've got no data on nature connectedness over more than 5 years, so we don't really know where we've been. And if we don't know where we've been, how do we know which direction we're heading in? So I started thinking about that, and I wanted a way to reflect our relationship with nature. And I looked at it in 3 ways. And the first kind of fundamental is that writing reflects culture. So it's the opening picture. How many nature words would these people use in their day-to-day life? What would they write about if they kept a diary? What would they write about if they wrote a story? And how many nature words would they use? Simple words, not species names, things like bird, bud, blossom, flower, 28 of those words. And I found that the frequency of those nature words appearing in English texts since 1800, that's as far back as the database would go, went like this. So it kind of held reasonably steady until 1850 and then dropped. And then there's this intriguing uptick at the end, which I don't know. We'll come back to the little uptick. So those nature words, I chose them carefully and also did some stats on them, so some factor analysis on them to make sure that they were a coherent group. They were doing the same thing in terms of they were cohesive group. And we standardized them. Well, I say we, I did it on my own. I standardized them to make sure that we're all inputting in to a similar level rather than others, some dominating. So I'll go back first. Oh, no, I can't go back. Just a minute. I will go back. Just a minute. Yeah, so we've got this drop here. This is just the frequency index that the corpus uses. So we've got 0.7 down to high 0.2s. So is that drop realistic? Well, the word frequency is kind of 50 to 60% lower than 1800. But when you look at the values for Nepal and the difference to the United Kingdom, the UK is about 69% lower. And the US, because this English corpus is probably dominated by American works, because it's just a bigger country, is 57% lower. So yeah, perhaps it is in the right type of ballpark. We're using nature words 50 to 60% less, and as a reflecting our culture, perhaps that is kind of in the right type of area. So that was the first approach, and then I used computer simulation to simulate people in nature over time. So these people here, I like to imagine, it's a computer simulation, they don't exist, but I like to imagine the people. And what that computer simulation did is it used the urbanization data for the US, which went from, I don't know, 7%, I think, in 1800 through to high 80% now. And it created a little world which became more and more urban. And as it becomes more and more urban, it becomes less and less natural. That simulated each person's life within that urbanizing environment. It simulated the amount of attention they paid. We've just seen that noticing nature matters for people's relationship with nature. And that drove their level of nature connectedness each year and fed back to their attention as well. So the more you tend to look at nature, that you've got this virtuous circle there. So the computer simulated that. But it also, it was over 220 years, the simulation, the same time scale as the words. So it did intergenerational effects. So it looked at parents as well. So a child's nature connectedness was mostly informed by their parents, but also depended on how much nature was nearby as well. So that briefly maps out what the computer simulation did. This maps it out in a bit more detail. So you've got the blue dots, you'll see the blue dots in a minute, are people and families. The blue dots in the bit I'm going to show you are families, and each family's got 4 people in, 2 adults and 2 children. I just kept it simple. And then there's an annual cycle where their level of nature connection changes depending upon the environment, which is down here. So red is urban, blue is families, and it's all done within this computer code here and cycles around And the best way to do it is to watch it. So hopefully on the next slide, yes, there we go. And if I press play, there we go. So it goes, you can see the year moving along from 1800 through to the present day, the number of families here, the number of individuals in those families. The families are blue, the urban areas are red, getting redder and redder, and the green areas are getting less and less. And then the mean level of nature connection. So each year, the simulation samples the population of what their level of nature connection is, and maps that. I didn't need to do this simulation to make it visual. It all works on charts, but I grew up in the 1980s and I used to faff around with home computers, and that's about as good as I could get in the 1980s. So I find this very fascinating to watch. So I'll play it again because I could watch this all day. And obviously each time it's different. There's random factors in there, and there you go. All these little families pootling around in an increasingly urban world and getting less and less exposure to nature, and their children becoming less nature connected as well. So that's the concept, and that's what the program did. And then there we go. So as I just said, that agent-based model, that's the formal term for it, was measuring people's nature connectedness each year. That's the red line. And then we map it against the blue line. And the fit is pretty good. Bring us back to the little uptick. But overall, the fit was 95% accurate. There was 4.5% error over the run. And the ABM explained 92% of the variance in nature word use. So that independent simulation of the last 220 years produced a curve which was very similar. So as those simulated people experienced less and less nature, their use of nature words decreased, or their nature connectedness decreased, depending on how you term it. So yeah, I thought that felt pretty compelling, and you get that same similar level of dip, although obviously it's a bit more because we've not got this uptick. We'll come back to the uptick. So that was approach 2, I think. Oh, I'm not finished with approach 2. Yeah, and what you can do with the agent-based models is you can do a sensitivity analysis for various factors. So this is just an example of you can change the parent weight. How much nature connection comes from a parent and how much comes from the environment. In that model, it was 70% came from the parent, gave you the best result. So you can say 50% it wasn't so good, 90% it was rubbish, but 70 it worked quite nicely. So useful ways of looking at things as well. And then approach 3. Oh, I should mention actually that paper was published in July. I think you might have seen it in the Guardian. It got covered in the Guardian because the loss of nature words is quite interesting in itself, and then the computer simulation is quite nice. So that's had quite a bit of press and quite a bit of interest. And then that was published in July. And then the third approach is a weighted linear combination model. This is a whole world that I never used to get involved in until AI came along, and all these ideas that were in my head, I can now write computer programs for, because I didn't have the talent to write the computer programs. But the power tool of AI has enabled me to make my ideas come to life. So this approach looks at those macro factors that we just considered in the green and blue X, and then looks at how those macro factors explain the words, the loss of words. So all these macro factors are kind of, how do they explain that? That should be published maybe next month or soon after. I've just responded to the reviews. They told me it was a machine learning model, but little did I know I'd wandered into machine learning. So here are all the factors. So you'll recognize, hopefully, the green, the kind of lime, greeny line, that's our nature words, I think. Forgetting myself here. I've not looked at this slide for a bit. I don't think it is. That's religion, yes. I looked at the macro factors in exactly the same way by looking at word use. So to get data on the cultural significance of science, religion, industry, humanism, urbanization, and economy, I went back to the corpus and got those trends. And then what you do in this machine learning model is you go through those 48 million combinations that there are, and you try and squeeze them together in a way that replicates the use of nature words. So how do all these changes in science, religion, industry, humanism, urbanization, and economy, how do all those curves mash together to produce the curve in nature words? And it turns out, after a lot of faffing about, that yes, they can. You can put them in a model, and the machine learning can find how all those lines, if you combine them all together in a certain way with certain weightings, you can very accurately replicate the change in nature words, even more accurately than the agent-based model, which is not surprising, I suppose, because there's more macro factors. So that also allows you to look at the weight of different factors, which I don't think I've got time to talk about today. But you can see what weight industry had, for example, what weight religion had, what weight the economy had, and how those all fit together. But that is another story and another paper. But those three approaches come together and tell one story of, we've got this decline in our relationship with nature. Seems to be 1850 when things started to go south, and then probably a bit more of a rapid change from 1900, which kind of echoes increasing urbanization in a period of industrialization. Obviously, industrialization had been going on for quite a while, but there was quite an intense expansion around then. And then we're back to the intriguing uptick at the end, which either exists or it doesn't. What I did with that model is I ran it into the future as well, with scenarios that were either on trend, more science, less industry, more humanism, more urban, and with some recovery factors, whether we had a greener urban environment or we became slightly more nature focused than human focused, and to see what happened to the uptick. And what we found was that uptick petered out. If you carried on the trends that had been going on for the last 220 years, the uptick kind of petered out, as I say, when things carried on back down. And then if you did the recovery scenario, we can get out of it. That was with the weighted sum model. I ran the ABM to 2125, which is, ridiculous length of time into the future, and you can't really believe what it's saying, but it was just an indication, and just because I could. And I did similar things: improved access to nature, opportunity, to engage with nature, and then improved engagement with nature, the orientation to engage with nature, and 3 scenarios. And those scenarios were 50% more engagement with nature and more nature, 100% more engagement with nature and 100% more nature, and then 300% more engagement with nature and 1,000% more nature, which might sound really ridiculous. But I found I had to go that far to make any difference. So I thought the model wasn't working, but it turned out that you needed a very big lever to change 200 years worth of momentum. So what you found was, in the agent-based model, the lowest interventions, 50% more nature, 50% more attention to nature, it just carries on down and levels off a bit. But with the kind of transformative increase of nature of 1,000% and attention going up 300%, it went up. It took 30 years to start going up, but then became self-sustaining as well. So just a kind of insight into systems and feedback loops and the like. So this brings me back to the IPBES report on transformational change. So we've got transforming urban greening and access towards 1,000%, individual trying to engage people with nature. And we also, in the model, put intergenerational transmission and school environments and increasing nature connectedness within children there. And then the 1,000% is worth thinking about as well. It seems ridiculous, but then if you think about urbanisation has increased from 7 to 83% since 1800, that's over 1,000%, I think. It's over tenfold, which must be 1,000%. And the median time in green space is now 4 minutes 36 seconds. Well, perhaps 1,000% is real, and maybe, if it's about time and engagement, is achievable. So it's a research paper it's obviously, it's not a conclusion that that's what we need to do, but it starts helping you think about what we need to do and what is the scale of transformative change. And that's it. So a whirlwind tour through 12 years of research and a bit more detail on the last 10 months. And if you want to read about it, there's lots of free information on my blog at findingnature.org.uk, including these downloads. You can buy the book, Reconnection, which is the kind of deeper version. And then if you're looking for a Christmas present, I've got another book. And that's not the title, actually. That was a previous cover. So there's another book as well if you're looking for a Christmas present. So there we go. Questions, welcome.
Thank you, Miles. That was absolutely brilliant and a fascinating insight into sort of a lack of connection that we seem to have developed over the last century or so. And I'm sure there are lots of questions. I've got one or two, but I shall pass over to other people first, if that's okay with you. Barbara, I think you were first.
Many thanks, Miles. Very fascinating concepts and research. With your models, I love the idea of 1,000% enhancement in our connection to nature, and I've got some suggestions how we might achieve it. So I'll pitch them in now, and you can tell me what you think. It seemed to me that BES assessment, I looked at the other two. You said nature connectedness was one aspect. They also talked about wealth inequality, which is definitely important, but there was no mention there of the fact that humans are very much overpopulated on this planet. Probably about three quarters of the over the carrying capacity, I would say. Somewhere between 2 and 3 billion is about all that a planet of 12 billion global hectares could viably cater for. And we're going to be in chronic ecological overshoot while that persists. And biodiversity is going to be a problem all the time we stay at that level. So I'm suggesting as a good mindset shifter and a very high level Donella Meadows leverage point would be to educate people about the carrying capacity of the planet, because that is a big omission in all our education at the moment, basically because people are find it too divisive a topic to talk about. So that's my suggestion, to get a 1,000% increase in nature connectedness.
Well, Miles, what do you think of that?
Well, yeah, you're very obviously all suggestions gratefully received, and obviously reducing the population is a topic that people discuss, and it is starting to go down. Well, not go down, it's kind of level off, isn't it, in Western nations? So perhaps it will happen naturally, if not by. It's obviously going to be a very difficult policy to pitch. So, but yes, I can see that. I don't think there's a single country on the planet that exists within its resource availability
capacity. Yes, at the moment.
Yeah.
When you say it's a difficult policy, it's certainly difficult if nobody talks about it, and that's the stage that we're at the moment.
Well, yeah,
I think that because young adults tend to spend most of their really energetic lives focusing on bringing up a young family, they don't have the energy. They're not applying their energy and ingenuity in the direction of saving our ecosystems. So we're liable to be extinct with this sort of focus with our priorities.
Yeah, but I mean, ecology and relationships should be part of the curriculum, and that the use of natural resources comes within that, and I think that's the wider thing. You can't. When I last looked, you couldn't do an undergraduate degree in ecology, and I don't think you can do a postgraduate degree in ecology. Our entire health education system is fractured around human and natural science, and so it comes back to a relational kind of perspective and looking at all the relationships between all the constituent parts of the planet.
Yeah, thank you, Miles. Karen, over to you.
Thank you, Ian. Two questions, if I may. Firstly, I mean, obviously, fantastically supportive of nature connectedness. In my own sort of very modest way, I've been pushing that for decades now, probably, both practically in terms of what I've done with students and in philosophical discussions that included last night. Almost every time I do, though, certainly in terms of the philosophical and talking to academics, I get tripped up by the whole negative side of this. And I wonder whether you had any sort of top tips for dealing with the negative side. So you mentioned positive emotions, but quite often once people get close to nature, there are some horrendous big negative emotions: death, destruction, all the battles that are going on, famine, etc. And then it becomes, How do you tackle that?
Yeah, well, we try to keep things positive because when you describe a nature-connected community, perhaps that can be a positive vision, and you involve the community in developing that vision, it can be a positive vision. So I think nature connection, rather than the environment, quite often when we talk about environmental issues and treating the symptoms, it comes across as a life without. So don't fly, don't do this, don't do that, which is very easy to turn off from, and is negative by the fact that it's doing without. But a relationship with nature is a life with, and it's a positive relationship. A relationship with nature can fill in the gaps that some people have if they've not got a relationship with other people. It's a relationship like any other, and it's a positive one that's good for your own well-being and good for your community's well-being and good for nature's well-being. So we very much focus on that. So if you go to the handbook, to the website, sorry, my blog, you can see the handbooks on community, creating nature-connected communities and things like that, and you'll see that we very much tried to put a positive spin on it. And there's a blog on my blog on anxiety as well, and environmental climate anxiety and the like. When you look down into the research, it's not actually nature connection. The closer relationship doesn't, from what we know so far, doesn't cause the anxiety. There's some studies that suggest that, but when you look a bit deeper, it's other aspects of the way people are perhaps thinking and working and kind of focusing on the negatives tends to lead to anxiety, unsurprisingly.
Okay, thank you. I suppose the other thing that struck me, but I haven't got your complete list of countries, but top of the list was Nepal, and I suspect their infant mortality rate, for example, is much higher than people. I mean, personally, my view would be we need to embrace death as well, and we need to get closer to nature in order to understand that we are part of a cycle and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, my second question was more about your research on the nature words. My initial thought was I wondered how you'd selected the text that you were looking at, because I imagine depending on what type of text you were selecting, there could be huge variations. And then from that, I also wondered how you actually defined a nature word. I mean, I would argue that probably half the dictionary actually is a nature word. So I wondered how you'd selected those things for inclusion in the model.
The texts are a corpus. I think it's just about every book published in English since 1800. So it's as close to everything as you can get. I'm sure it misses out quite a lot, but
is that fiction or non-fiction?
Both.
Oh, right. Okay.
And then nature words. We do a lot of interventions, and we've done analysis of people's writing about nature. When you ask people to write about the good things in nature, they use simple words: bird, bud, blossom, flower, and they're in fundamental kind of words about parts of nature. And you can do a lot of theorizing about what nature is and what nature isn't, but when you ask people to do a basic task, you get similar themes come up and similar. Our relationship with nature is quite simple, really. It's a simple concept that used to be, we used to be deeply embedded with it, and it wasn't a complex thing, really.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree at all. But I also wondered, looking over a 200-year period of time, I imagine 200 years ago, we were much more affected by nature and natural disasters, and inherently we were closer to nature. So I wondered to what extent that was then therefore reflected in the writing from 200 years.
Well, and I've looked at natural disasters as well in some other work. So that the figure with the X, natural disasters by country, was included, and it wasn't significant. So quite often it's nations with a closer relationship with nature suffer more natural disasters. So it's natural disasters isn't a core thing that defines the population's relationship with nature. It can be, as I say, you can have a close relationship with nature in a nation that has some very nasty natural things happen.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I've taken quite enough time.
Thank you. It was lovely. Glenn, you're welcome. Thanks.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you, Miles. And I did actually do one of the, I think it was a MOOC from Derby about nature connectedness a few years back.
Yeah.
Probably one of yours. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things. To start with, the slide that you put up about how do we know where we are if we don't know where we've been. And you mentioned the kind of progression from hunter-gatherers right through to where we are today. And I wondered, for me looking at this, Descartes in the Western context seems to be a pivotal break in shifting us away from nature, and I wondered how much of that are you taking into account. I mean, and it's been something that's talked about for many years. In particular, I'm thinking of Fritjof Capra's book, The Tao of Physics, in 1975, and on since then, it's been referenced in quite a number of cases, and led to more of the concept of the autonomous individual, which I think you can trace through right into the 20th century and consumption and so on, even if you want to push it up to the 1980s and the yuppie and so on. And it's all very much about becoming a view of nature that is there to be exploited.
Yes, it's nature connectedness is a worldview question in the end, and the Cartesian worldview is very much part of the book, and it's a running theme through it. And you might have noticed, it wasn't there for long, but one of the early slides was a quote from Tim Ingold: a single underlying fault upon which the entire edifice of Western thought and science has been built, namely that which separates the two worlds of humanity and nature. That is that same Cartesian world, mind and body.
The dualist concept, and I think it's also quite interesting. That's very much the dominant view that you talked about in the West, and it's quite interesting to look at some other parts of the world where aspects of ancient wisdom have persisted a lot longer.
Very much so. I mean, that it's not my area of expertise, but I read quite a bit of anthropological research and other about First Nations and indigenous populations, and they have different worldviews, but unfortunately the Western worldview is spreading.
And it has been spreading through colonialism for many years. Yeah, I know that. And just another quick point. At one point you mentioned about, the development of the school curriculum and so on to get to nature connectedness, which is something that I'm particularly interested in, but also the fact that the idea of a sustainable future is not being part of our education system. But there has been, I mean, you mentioned campaigns. There has been a very strong campaign, I would suggest, through the 90s and early 2000s up until about 2010, and it still continues to some extent, about sustainable futures, the whole field of ESD, and it dates back to David Hicks and sustainable education, sustainable futures education that he developed there, right through to Stephen Sterling's work and beyond. But it's lost prominence. It was probably at its peak in the late 2000s, first decade of this century, and has subsided to some extent since, but it's still there.
Oh, yeah. And obviously our relationship with nature has been discussed for, centuries and beyond. And I suppose it's the fact that we've become more and more and more aware of the environmental issues, but still, it's not a priority. It's not an aim of education, and
well, the more and more aware of environmental issues is the knowledge action gap, that whole area as well. But I've said enough, and there's other people queuing up. So.
Thanks, Glenn. Lovely. Roger, you're next up. Yeah.
Thank you, Miles. And I've got your book, and I've read most of it, but not all of it. So
congratulations.
And I very much agree with what you said about the need to make things positive. I didn't spend 20 years at Friends of the Earth without learning that if you're not going to get anywhere by basically preaching doom and gloom. I think the question I had really, though, related to spirituality and well-being and nature connection. And I guess it's to what extent it matters, because there's an awful lot of religions out there that kind of have a monopoly on spirituality or in the public discourse. And I'm wondering whether, it's a case of trying to influence the religious leaders in those cultures to sort of put more emphasis on nature connection, or whether you think it's more a question of trying to go for the sort of secular section of society and try and almost instigate a new spiritual purpose within those people to connect with the natural world.
Yeah, I think I'll go with the latter. I'm not an expert on religions, but when you look at the data and when we looked at these macro factors, where in nations where more people believe in God and heaven, they have a closer relationship with nature. Whether that's a causal thing, who knows? But they are a lot. The population is it's kind of 99% engaged with regular religious practice. So the mechanism there and how all that works, I don't know. But obviously, secularism in Western nations is on the rise. But people haven't changed fundamentally. We're always looking for meaning, and we find it in there's lots of new places to find meaning. That's the trouble, isn't it? We find it on social media and influencing people and in ourselves and TikTok and all manner of stuff. So I think there's still a search for meaning, which could be tapped into in terms of, I think as I briefly mentioned, this kind of, there's been such rapid changes in technology, which over centuries, but seemingly keep accelerating somehow. But there's not really been an evolution in spirituality, perhaps. I'm kind of getting outside of my knowledge area very much, but yeah, it's that kind of, people still search for meaning in life, and people want meaning in life. So yeah, if something was offered there, perhaps they would take it up.
Okay, thank you. Let's go.
Thank you, Roger. John.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Miles, for a really interesting talk and agreeing to share your research with the Institute. We're at the moment on using digital technology. You've used digital technology in your teaching, and you've used AI in your presentation. I was interested when I read your book about how people find themselves more connected to nature when they see photographs. And I just wonder what your view is regarding the new digital technologies. Is that a way, or is that a way of enabling people to connect more with nature? Or do you feel perhaps there is a danger that connecting with nature through the screen is going to be a substitute for actually the real thing?
Yeah, no, I have concerns about taking that route. I mean, the virtual experiences of nature are beneficial, and they can help. I suppose they trick your body in a way they can help manage your mood, and you get those physiological responses that you get being in real natural environments, but not as powerfully as you would imagine from being in a natural environment, a real natural environment. But then technology always improves, so those virtual experiences will get more immersive and more immersive. But yeah, so I'm a bit scared that that's the kind of grey goo argument out there, isn't it? That you can put never mind, you can put your headset on and listen to the birds singing, and that'll be all right. I don't like that that approach. So yeah, I think the real thing matters, and I think AI and all the different technology you've just got. There are people trying to use it to engage people with nature, and that's what you have to try and do. And if you could get a hologram of Richard Attenborough to take you on your walk through the park, that would probably engage a lot more people with it. Then there's very different ways of doing that, and different figures that you could select. And yeah, perhaps that's the way forward of using technology to engage people. But there'll always be a battle for attention. There'll be technology engaging you with other things where more money can be made. So that's the issue.
Thank you, Miles. That actually is quite an interesting link to a question in the chat about how can we encourage nature connectedness without commodifying nature. That's from Pichu, and it is quite an interesting problem, isn't it? That it opens up opportunities for commercialization if we're not careful. Is that a bad thing or not?
Well, yes. Well, I think nature is already commodified. It's a strange word, isn't it? I mean, the only thing that's not packaged and sold to us is air, really, isn't it? We buy water. So, I don't know. I mean, you don't want nature to become a product, but if it's a product that can make you feel well and bring you meaning, it's competing with other products. Yeah, I kind of got no answer to that. Yeah.
Right. Barbara, is that a quick one?
It's not about feeling well and bringing meaning just to us. That's a bit human centric, Miles, that last comment of yours. We rely on biodiversity for survival, and I'm not sensing enough of that in this whole conversation. It's as though, and we're in an ecological and climate crisis, and it's not coming through in this conversation. So I'm really disappointed from that perspective.
Yeah, well, I think I did say that it unites, when I defined it unites people and nature's well-being. And that's why it matters to me, is because of the pro-nature behaviours. That's why we do it. But the only way you can get policymakers interested is when it boosts human well-being. So I agree with you. We are human-centric, and we don't put nature first enough. And that's my next project is around putting nature first. So you'll see that. But it's very much. But then we're programmed to talk about and think about ourselves. And
great. Thank you, Miles, for that. One other question, you may not be able to do much with at the moment, but Laura was asking about your work with the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. She has this interest in art and social collective practice. Is there anything you can quickly say about that?
Yeah, we did a project with Yorkshire Sculpture Park, and there's an installation there, which is slowly degrading over time. I don't know whether you can still go in it, but nothing new planned. We keep in touch with them, and we do our Tune Into Nature Music Prize with the support of Yorkshire Sculpture Park. So that will hopefully, if we can find a sponsor, that will hopefully run again from next month, where we encourage younger people to celebrate their relationship with nature in music.
Yeah. Well, perhaps Laura can contact you. She's pushing ahead with work in that area, so she's researching into. Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, it is fascinating. People have asked quite a few of the questions that were bubbling up in my mind, and the only area that I'm sort of slightly worried about is there a confounding factor in nature connectedness with the fact that there's a lot of social disconnection happening, that we are all living very isolated, insular lives, and it's we're disconnecting from everything in certain aspects.
Well, yes, that's another area of research that we've got into this year, which I didn't have time to cover. So we're now doing a project with the National Trust on heritage connectedness, and that included social connectedness. So I think it's about taking that kind of satellite view, and it's not just nature connectedness, it's connectedness, and it's relationships. Relationships make the world go round. Relational worldviews are healthy, and that a relational mindset and relationships with people, nature across time and place. That's what I'm trying to tie all together in that project.
Well, thank you very much, and all strength to you, and thank you for presenting such a great story, especially with a lot of evidence in there, in a sense, which is absolutely brilliant. And we've hit 5:30, which is a good time. And on behalf of everybody here, I'd like to say thank you very much, Miles, for a great talk and
thanks for inviting me, and thanks for listening, and thanks for all the questions as well.
Right. We look forward to what comes next.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, watch this space.
Thanks, indeed.
Right. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye all. Yeah, take care. Good.